Everybody smile. Dear friends, my name is Nate Sanford, and my greatest earthly blessing is that I married the former Daisha Peacock, daughter of Ronnie and Martina Peacock, and granddaughter of the lady that we are gathered here today to commemorate. We are so gathered to recognize the natural and the supernatural through the life of Charlene Knight Prock. The natural, she was born and died just like all of us were and someday will be. The supernatural, Charlene was an orphan, so what many would consider to be a throwaway life was fully redeemed by Jesus, whose power also worked through her late husband, John Prock, and the life-giving influence of the family of God, which is many of you here today. It is my deepest desire that you don't leave this building without the hope that you, like Charlene, will live again in a resurrected and perfected body in ever-increasing joy and everlasting peace. Today, we're surrounded by this great crowd of witnesses, many of whom have tales they would love to tell about Gigi. But we are limited to just a handful, so please share your stories with each other and thereby encourage each other to live like Charlene did, fully, selflessly, loyally, humbly, hilariously. Let's get right to our first speaker. Among Gigi's many friends, several were men who loved her and she loved them. Now, she would affectionately call them her boyfriends, yet most of them were married. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, if you knew her, their wives loved Gigi just as much as their husbands did. One of her favorite boyfriends, Steve Lake, couldn't be with us today due to a previously planned commitment, but he wanted to share a few thoughts via this short video.
Greetings to each of you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today. Months ago, I made plans to travel to New York City this particular weekend. In fact, I'm confident Charlene would want me to say, live from New York, this is Charlene's celebration of a wonderful life. Charlene was spunky and fun and absolutely full of laughter and joy. Somehow, God arranged it for Charlene and I to become buddies about 15 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago, we were going out to eat, and she said, Steve, I have a favor I want to ask. I said, what's that? She said, would you be willing to speak at my funeral? It kind of caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say, but I wanted her to keep pushing ahead and living life fully. So I quickly proposed a deal. I said, this is so odd. I was actually hoping you would agree to speak at my funeral. So we made a deal. Whoever went first, the other one would agree to speak. So Charlene, you won. Here I am, talking and sharing stories about one special lady that I love. I know there are many of us who counted Charlene as a dear friend. So today, I thought I would share a few memories and stories about Charlene. My hope is that these will prompt you to recall some of those same moments that you shared with her. Let's talk about the things she loved, because she didn't hesitate to tell you about that. It has to begin with Clifford. She loved that man, his demeanor, his looks, the woodworking, how he didn't believe in fussing at one another around the house. Clifford had experienced that in his youth, and he wasn't going to have it in his home. She desperately loved her children and grandchildren and whole family. She loved her Hollis, Oklahoma. I have never been to Hollis, but I sure feel like I have because I've heard countless stories about it. She loved to go and do. She loved sweet tea and spicy talk. She loved country music. This is something that bonded us. But she had a saying. She called it the real country music. She wasn't very fond of where country music sound was going lately, so that's why she would tell me to play the real country music. That meant Merle Haggard, Jim Reeves, Roger Miller. You do know he was from Oklahoma, don't you? Johnny Cash, Garth Brooks. You do know he's from Oklahoma, don't you? Ronnie Milsap. She didn't like Vince Gill much, but you do know he's from Oklahoma, don't you? One of my favorite memories is when I bought her and I tickets to see Ronnie Milsap, and I paid a little extra to sit on the first 3 or 4 rows. We had the best time, and I can promise you, Charlene got lost in the 50s that night. She loved long car rides, especially in the country. She and I drove to northern Missouri to see the Bisons play in a playoff game one time. We talked about the rolling hills, we laughed, we stopped and ate great food. She told stories about Hollis. She would constantly mention people like Stu Varner, Ronnie and Peggy, James and Bonnie Frank, Doc City, Marge Ryan, Daniel and Megan Adams, Georgia and Nelson James, West Side and all her friends there, and the Lytle Center and all her friends there, Laura Burks, Brian Burks, Ellis and Lori Sloan, and Treva Pryor. She loved it when old Bison football players would come visit her, and so many of you did. She really loved and appreciated the fact that Ken Bissell wrote the book about Coach Prock and Bison football. And obviously, she would constantly talk about Mona and Marty, Martina and Ronnie and Phyllis. And I think we all know how crazy she was about her boy, Cam. She told me memories of being with Coach Prock on many recruiting trips across the country. Specifically, I remember stories about their recruiting trip to recruit Carl Kowitsky and Roddy Moat. She really enjoyed eating at the Red Apple Inn, going to Shorty's to eat beans, cornbread, and an appetizer of fried mushrooms. She loved KJ's. She loved fried bologna sandwiches. She loved telling stories of her catering days and all the famous people she had fed, and all the great Cersei kitchens that she had been in. She had sayings that she would say, like when she talked about traveling or high-end living, she would say, the jet set. She would talk and talk and talk and then suddenly realize, what am I doing? And then she would say, I'm rattling on like a $2 sewing machine. I'm not sure what her relationship with Coach Prock was like, but I definitely sensed that Coach paid all the bills and took care of the cars. I have a couple stories that confirm those facts. Charlene was driving a sedan, and one day she called me and said she needed my help to buy a new car. I said, what? What happened? She said, well, my engine, it died, it burned up. I said, what? How? And then she said, did you know you have to put oil in cars? Then my other story relates to how she spent money. Somewhere along our friendship, my email address got associated with her credit card. So I happened to notice about 3 or 4 times a year she would go shopping for clothes at the Blackbird Boutique and buy some outfits. She always looked so nice. And every time she did, I would get an email with all the details. One day, I got one of those emails, and I happened to see her that same night. So I thought I'd tease her a little bit about buying clothes. So I said, did you go buy a gray sweater, some black pants, and a red top today and spend $240? She stared at me for about 5 or 10 seconds. I know what she was thinking. How does he know that? Am I in trouble for spending too much money? Then suddenly she says, I'll take it back. I started giggling and I told her that she wasn't in trouble and I didn't care and she could spend her money however she wanted. But I tell you this because it's funny, but also to explain Charlene's sweet and non-confrontational nature. I want to close today with a poem about an elderly lady looking in the mirror. When I read it, it reminded me of Charlene, and I bet it will for you as well. I looked in the mirror, and what did I see but a little old lady peering back at me, with bags and sags and wrinkles and wispy white hair. And I asked my reflection, how did you get there? You once were straight and vigorous, and now you're stooped and weak, when I tried so hard to keep you from becoming an antique. My reflection's eyes twinkled, and she solemnly replied, you're looking at the gift wrap and not the jewel inside. A living gem and precious, of unimagined worth, unique and true, the real you, the only you on earth. The years that spoil your gift wrap with other things more cruel should purify and strengthen and polish up that jewel. So focus your attention on the inside, not the out, on being kinder, wiser, more content, and more devout. Then, when your gift wrap is stripped away, your jewel will be set free to radiate God's glory throughout all eternity.
About 9 years ago, Gigi had a dream fulfilled when Ken Bissell wrote a book about Papa's life. Now, apparently several guys had given her the opportunity that she was going to have a book written about her life, and that's something she dearly wanted. But Ken Bissell actually made it come true. If you haven't read his book, you need to. Gigi really treasured it, and Ken became one of her dear friends. Ken will share with us now a few stories about Gigi's fascinating and interesting life. Ken Bissell.
Thank you, Nate. Let me first of all say how tremendously impressed I am that these young men are here and they're dressed in their jerseys. And I know she and Coach are looking at right now with a big grin on their face. Would you not agree? What a tremendous way to commend her life. And guys, you probably never met Miss Prock, Charlene. Some of you older players might have met her. But I can tell you, she would hug every one of you. If you were in a line and she would stand there, she would hug and talk to you until every one of you passed through. She loved Bisons, and she loved Bison football. So I'm so glad y'all are here, and I appreciate Coach Simmons and the coaches for making that possible. Well, it's an honor and a privilege to stand before you today, and I really appreciate Cam and Mona for their invitation to speak, to share a few thoughts about their mom and our friend Charlene. So before I step into my thoughts, a couple of housekeeping things that I want to bring up. Number one, some of you have already found the Facebook page, Remembering Charlene Prock, but some of you probably have not seen it. If you're on Facebook, I want to encourage you to go out and like that page. It was created for folks like all of us to share our memories, our photographs, and there's been a ton of comments and stories shared by so many of you who have told stories about your relationship with her. So go out and like that page and read and share. I know that the family has been blessed by that and many of her friends, and so I just want to encourage you to do that. The other thing I'll mention, and this is not a sales pitch, it's just to make you aware. Nate mentioned the book, and some of you have read it. Some of you may not have it. I've got about 12 copies that I brought with me. They're in the annex, so when we go back and eat, if you're interested, I'd be happy to work with you on that. I typically charge $20 for the book, but I'm going to do it for $10. I paid $9.50 for that book, so I get 50 cents out of that. It's not to make a buck. It's really more just to get the story in folks' hands. But if I don't have enough, I'll get your name and your number, and we'll make a deal. I'll send it to you. So just FYI if you're interested in that. The truth is that many of you are more qualified to stand here and talk about Charlene Prock than I am, because you've known her for many, many years, and you have so many great stories. And so I feel a little awkward actually standing before you to talk about her, because I probably know her less than most of you. I've only known Charlene for about 10 years, but we crammed a whole lot of stuff in 10 years. I spent a lot of time with her as I was working on the book, and it was just such a tremendous blessing. So my first conversation with her ever was in February of 2013. And I'll tell you a little bit about the book and sort of how it came to be. I had started out my career as a sports writer. I was a journalism major at Harding. I was a sports writer. And so as the years passed, I thought someday I want to write a book. I don't know what the book is going to be about, but I want to write a book. But between a very hectic career and raising a family, I just didn't feel like I had time to write. So I came back to work here at Harding in 2011, and my pace was a little bit slower. And so I thought, okay, time is slipping away, so it's now or never. I need to do this book. But I really didn't know what I was going to write. I thought maybe a fiction book, I had some ideas, or maybe a biography. But I worked in the PR office at Harding in the late 80s, and worked with a wonderful, just a dear, dear person to my wife Renee and me, Alice Keller. Many of you know Alice. She and Wayne were dear, dear friends of the Procks for many years. And so Alice told the story. I see some Kellers right back there. Alice told me a little bit of the story about Coach Prock and his challenging childhood and how difficult it was. And that always stuck in the back of my mind. This had been 25, 30 years before. So I thought, well, maybe that's the book. So I called Charlene up and I said, asked her if I could come and visit her in her home. And she obliged me, so I told her of my plan about possibly writing this book. And 4 hours later, I'd heard enough to think, okay, this is probably something I want to do. It was a stream of consciousness for her. She just poured it out. I mean, I asked, tell me the story. 4 hours later, we were done. So this is what she said to me. She said, so tell me, are you going to write this book? Well, I think so. No, I want to know, are you going to write this book? Well, yes, ma'am, I believe so. I think I'm going to. No, you're not listening to me. Are you going to write this book? I mean, she leaned forward and she gritted her teeth. She said, are you going to write this book? I said, yes, ma'am, I'm going to write the book. She said, well, I'm going to hold you to that because you're the third person who said they were going to write it and the other two didn't. So you're talking about pressure. For the next 20 months, between planning, interviews, transcribing interviews, more research, writing, designing, working with the printer, and finally seeing it to come to fruition in November 14th. In that period of time, there were lots of times that I would look at my wife and I would say, what was I thinking? Why did I sign up to do this? I can't do this. I can't pull it off. I was working full time and working on this book early in the morning and late in the evening and on weekends. And I mean, it was a constant process. And the deeper I got into it, the more work it was. And I thought, what have I done? But then I would remember the look in her eyes that day in 2013, and I could not disappoint this sweet lady. And I'm so glad that I did it because it led to one of the sweetest friendships I've ever known, truly. And the great blessings through the connections I made with many of the old Bison, some of you are here, that I interviewed for that book. It was a tremendous blessing. And like Steve, I had the joy of accompanying her on a few adventures. So some of you know that Coach Prock was inducted into the Arkansas Sports Hall of Fame in 2008. And he was already pretty ill at that point, so he could not attend. So she stood in front of several hundred people and gave a very eloquent speech to accept the award on his behalf. So that was a real meaningful event for her. Every year when they would have the induction ceremony in Little Rock, she would want to go. And so I had the pleasure of taking her to 3 or 4 of those induction ceremonies. We always had a great time. And the wonderful thing about it is I would just sit back and watch. And all of these old football players from the AIC would see her. And they would come up to her because they remember her from that speech. and they would come up to her and hug her neck and talk to her, and she loved it. She loved it. She loved the attention. Renee and I also enjoyed having her in our home several times for meals, including one Thanksgiving, which was very special. And we also, like Steve mentioned, he drove her to a football game. We drove her to a couple of football games over time. And she loved my wife just as much as she loved me. Loved being with her. Of course, the book was primarily Coach Prock's story, but in some ways I found her story to be equally fascinating. And she could tell a great story, couldn't she? The word raconteur comes to mind, raconteur. By definition, a raconteur is someone who can take a basic, even boring experience and turn it into a fascinating, mesmerizing yarn. And boy, she could tell some good yarns. So in the process of writing Many Sons to Glory and helping her write her own story for the Women for Harding cookbook, which is titled All the Good Stuff, and the little cover that you have with the obituary is sort of a mock-up of that cookbook. Some of you probably have it. As I helped her write that story in there of her life, I became intimately familiar with her life story. So between my transcriptions of our many conversations and the book's introduction, I thought I would read a few of her excerpts of her story. There's so many stories I'd like to tell, but because of time, I just can't tell them all. In fact, I had typed up some stuff or pulled some stuff together, and I timed it out, and it was 35 minutes long, and I said, that's not going to work. So I had to take some things out. So we're going to focus on her early days and their early marriage. There's so much more we could share. And so we're going to limit the amount that we share. But these are her words. To be clear, these are transcripts from our conversations and some from the cookbook story. So you can close your eyes and hear her voice and hear her saying these words because these are her words. They are not mine, they're hers. So here's Charlene's story in her own words. It's been said that our life could be made into a movie. How many of y'all have ever heard her say that? Our life could be made into a movie. For the first 74 years of my life, I did not know where I was born. I did not know my birthday. I wasn't really sure how old I was, and I was not legally married. I basically had to put the bits and pieces I found out through the years together to have the story that I have today. Supposedly I was born in Fort Worth, Texas to Odell Martin, a single mother. My birth mother worked at the stockyards and would take me to her friend's sister's house for this woman and her husband to babysit me while she worked. This couple, Jim and Viola Knight, loved children, had been married for 18 years and were not able to have children of their own. They told me that they had been babysitting me for a while, and one day my mother said, well, if you want her, you can just have her, and she never came back. They did not legally adopt me, but because they did not adopt me, but gave me their last name. They knew the courts would take me from them because they were so poor. I grew up knowing they were not my real parents. They were kind Christian people and took me to church and showered me with lots of love. Mama quit school in the 2nd grade and Daddy quit in the 7th grade so they could find work in the fields. Because they did not finish school, it was very important to them that I stay in school and was educated. So let me hit the pause button for just a second and add an editorial comment. There's some debate about whether that story is true, whether Odell gave Charlene to the Knights. There's some speculation, and it may be true, that they took her. She was a single mother, and it was back in the early 30s. So we really don't know the truth to that story. That was the one that Charlene was told by her parents, and some of you have heard that story. But there's some debate as to whether or not it was one versus the other, so that's just a clarification. So let me go back to the story. We moved to Hess, Oklahoma, and I started 1st grade there. I would not stay in my seat. The teacher brought a new rope to school and tied me to my seat. I would lay my head on my desk, hoping my classmates would think I was sick. I lived in 9 different houses during the first 5 grades in Hess. Daddy would help farmers get their crop in, and we'd move to another farm, always living in a little house behind the farmers. He would set the crops out, and then we would have to move so he could help the next farmer. I can remember going to the bus for school and crying because I knew I wouldn't come back to that house anymore. I think that's why I don't like to move today. I'm attached to my house. We were very poor, but I don't think I knew that because all of my friends were just like me. We never had meat to eat except for a pound of sausage the first of the month and fish. My mama and daddy loved to fish. We ate biscuits and syrup for breakfast. We had whatever my parents grew in the garden and that my mama put up. We never had much of anything sweet, and I don't ever remember having a toothbrush or brushing my teeth until I was much older. Even so, I always had good teeth, and I was healthy. In my 12 years of school, I never missed a day from being sick. I never had any money to spend, but one day, for some reason, I had a nickel. I went across the dirt road to the little store, and the lady at the counter asked the girl ahead of me what she wanted. The girl said, "Give me a knee-high." They gave her a drink. Then the lady asked me what I wanted, and I said, "Give me a knee-high." I didn't even know what a knee-high was. Then she asked me what flavor. I didn't have a clue. Evidently, the girl ahead of me was in there often, and they knew what flavor she liked. I didn't even know what flavor was. In grade school, all my friends had two names, Mary Ellen, Wanda Lee, etc. I was just plain Charlene. So in the third grade, I started signing my name, Charlene Marie. But that's not her real name, by the way. That's a made-up middle name, if you were wondering. Now I felt like I fit in with the rest of my friends. It's on all my papers to this day, and after a lifetime of searching and finally finding my heritage and my birth certificate at age 74, there was no middle name on it. In Hess, we walked to church down the road from our house. When I was 11, one Sunday, several others were getting baptized at the river. I got baptized that day too. Billy Ray Tittle baptized me. It was in the Red River where there was running water. My mama always thought you had to be baptized in running water. When I was about to enter the 8th grade, we moved to Hollis, Oklahoma, next door to a boy named Clifford. His dad thought I was cute. Clifford didn't. He said I was too skinny and scrawny. I learned that years later. I didn't think he was too cute either. I wasn't boy crazy yet. At the end of that summer, we moved to a 2-room house on North Main Street. My daddy hauled freight to and from Altus and Hollis. That is how I learned to drive a stick shift in the Hollis alleys, moving the truck from store to store. The next 3 years, Clifford and I hardly knew each other. He was busy playing football and basketball, and I was busy twirling and playing basketball. During his senior year and my junior year, Clifford wanted to date my best friend June, and I wanted to date his best friend Sprout. One Saturday night, my friend June and I were walking up and down Hollis Broadway when we saw Clifford and Sprout's pickup. Sprout and June ended up getting together, which left Clifford and me together with no choice. We went to steal watermelons that night. That's a sign that something was. She's a little sneaky there, right? Sprout and June didn't last very long, but Clifford and I dated the next 2 years. I was a flag twirler in the 10th grade. In the 11th and 12th grade, I was a baton twirler, a majorette. I had to buy my baton. It cost $8. I would pay 50 cents a week for it until I got it paid off. I was working at the La Vista soda shop. I didn't have money like the other girls to go to twirling school in Norman, Oklahoma, so our drum major taught me how to twirl in her front yard the summer before the school started. I still have the baton on display in my home. What a memory and a treasure. I have a picture of our band marching in Hollis in the Labor Day Parade in our regular clothes in 1947. And that photo, by the way, is on the slideshow. I don't know if you saw it or not, but it was on the slideshow. School did not start until after Labor Day, and we didn't get uniforms until after school started. Clifford had a girlfriend his junior year named Jean Haynes. Then we started going together when I got in the pickup. So we ended up being together his senior year. A time or two we broke up during the year because he still had feelings for Jean. I remember working in the soda shop and seeing him walk by with her, and he didn't even look in there. He had given me a locket, and I jerked it off my neck and threw it on the floor. As he got closer to the end of his senior year, he couldn't make up his mind between Jean or me. He left for a senior trip the same day Jean and her family moved to California, and he said, "I'll know when I get home." I was waiting for him when the bus pulled up. When he stepped off the bus, he said, "Let's go get the ring." We went to J Day's jewelry store and got my ring that day. Right after that, Clifford bought a $300 truck and left for the wheat harvest in Kansas. When rain prevented hauling, he came home and we got married. I was with my parents in Keller, Texas, visiting an aunt when he came to tell me that we were getting married right then. We went back to Hollis, and on June the 5th, 1948, Clifford and I went to Wellington, Texas, taking witnesses Dorothy Fikes and Don Simmons to get married. We were 17 and 19, but we had to say we were 18 and 21. We got our license and went straight to the Justice of the Peace house, and all on the way there, he would say, "Don't forget you're 18, don't forget you're 18. So we get over there, and the Justice of the Peace says, "How old are you?" I said 18. Then he asked Clifford, "How old are you?" And he said 19, 21. So we got married just like that. So remember when she said she was illegally married? That's what she was talking about. They weren't of age, and they didn't have parents signing for them. There were no I do's, no promises to keep, no promises to have and to hold. No one declared us husband and wife. We were just married. I don't remember anything about it. We came back to Hollis, and he pushed me down the street in a wheelbarrow. The guys threw him in the swimming pool, all that old-timey stuff. As we started on what I like to call the wheat harvest honeymoon. By the way, how many people have heard the wheat harvest honeymoon story? That's a famous story, isn't it? Heading for Liberal, Kansas, steam shot out from under the car. The water hose had burst. We got out and started walking toward the next town, Canadian, Texas. A car going in the opposite direction turned back and took us into town. We had to wait for our car to be fixed and had to get a hotel room in town. The rodeo and fair were in progress right next to the hotel. The Ferris wheel outside our hotel room went round and round as the riders yelled. With no dark drapes or much soundproofing, we felt almost as though the fair was in the room with us. It was quite a honeymoon night. When the car had been repaired, we left for the harvest. We stayed in a basement at the first farm we were on. At the next stop, there was no place available, so Clifford put up a tent, working to get it just right. We worked and worked, getting it perfect. We dug a ditch around it so that in the case of rain, water would not get inside. To our dismay, a Kansas wind, rain, hailstorm blew up, and the tent closed and everything went blowing and washing down the yard. I was so scared that I went running to the barn because that's where my husband, my protector, was. Little did I realize that all the men who had been working on the farm had been caught out in the rainstorm too, and they were in the barn stripping their clothes off. When I appeared, they started running in every direction to hide. Our next move was into the barn, the only place we could go. The barn was piled high with corn, still in the shucks. All we had to sleep on were two narrow cots with wooden edges. The rats would rustle in the corn, and I got so scared that I abandoned my cot and got in the cot with Clifford. We were very uncomfortable, but I guess I thought he could protect me from the rats. With me not being able to take living with the rats, we moved on to the next place where we slept in a truck bed until a man came by and said he had sold the bed off of his truck to secure enough money to get him home. That's when we decided the real wheat harvest was not exactly like the Alan Ladd movie that had led us to believe, so we headed for Hollis. Mine and Clifford's backgrounds were full of improbabilities. Fate had it that Clifford and I were destined for each other. We never let our backgrounds hold us back from anything we wanted to do. Both of us always pulled ourselves up and did what the rest of the kids were doing. We never let ourselves get in a rut and stay in a rut. Our life together was a journey with doors opening all our lives to guide us. Our life was a tangled web that unfolded beautifully. I may have not had many clothes growing up. I always ate pie out of my hand, never had a Christmas tree or a birthday party, and never had my own bedroom until I got married. But I was taught right from wrong. I was taken to church. I had high self-esteem because I was loved by my parents and my husband. I was one lucky gal. I was the queen bee in the night house and the queen bee in the Prock house. That's why I am who I am today. I've been loved, all my life, from my birth mother to the ones who raised me and loved me, and then to Clifford. What a life. What a tremendous life. And we were all blessed to know her. And to the family, I want to say, I envy you because you had this wonderful woman who shined a light on all of you in ways that will forever be implanted into your memories. Hold on to those memories. But be happy, as hard as it is, to know that she's standing right beside Clifford John Prock, the old ball coach. And they are very, very happy together. She yearned for that moment, didn't she? And there she is, standing right beside him. So praise God for that.
Thank you, Ken. We all know there were about 300 more stories that you could have shared. As you heard from Ken, Gigi's first passion definitely was our papa, Coach Prock. And maybe her second passion was Harding Bison football. She was a surrogate mother to so many old Bisons, and to this day, these men honor and cherish her influence on them. She was also the perfect example of a coach's wife who took young women under her wings, whose husbands chose the very difficult life of a coach. Ronnie and Peggy Huckabee are going to come up and share a few thoughts on their deep relationship with the Procks. Come on, Coach.
Good afternoon. Ronnie and I are honored to get to share with you today about Mrs. Prock, or Charlene, or Gigi, which is how I have her in my phone. The first time I was around Mrs. Prock was Ronnie's senior year when she hosted a Players' Wives luncheon in her home. Here was this beautiful lady, a gracious host, whose house was a museum. She made us feel special, and we knew that she loved Harding football.
So many of Harding football players considered Gigi, Miss Prock, Charlene to be a second mom. And I want to explain that a little bit. She had a heart for all of us, but she had a special heart for freshmen. So many of us back in that day, and you guys can relate to this, came from long distances away. You know, I was 13 hours from home. I was homesick. I was weak. I was pitiful. And, but in my mind, you know, I was a senior in, you know, just a few months before, going to play college football. I was a stud in high school. In my mind, I was going to, you know, probably by the second game, I'd be starting. So we pull up to the old field house, and I get out of the car, and here's a guy who's a starting linebacker for Harding. His name is Bubba Hopkins, okay? He's got a kid. I mean, I'm 18 years old, and here's a guy that's got a kid. I'm like, I'm fixing to play with grown men. And then we go into practice, and after the first practice, you know, we're pitiful. I mean, we're really sweaty and dirty, and it's hot and humid. So we're going to take a shower. So we go into this shower that's about the size of a medium-sized walk-in closet, and there's 65 of us in there taking a shower. So it's, you know, you lost any inhibitions that you might ever have during that time. But Gigi was, she was our lifeline, okay? So many of us were, you know, we needed someone to love on us. College football is hard, and she was that person for us. It wasn't long after we'd gotten there that we had a Wednesday night devotional, and we broke up into small groups. And I happened to be in Miss Prock's small group. And during the course of that devotional, we were discussing some different things about the scriptures, and I made a comment. And after the after our small group broke up, the devotion was over, she came over to me and she put her arm around me and she said, I really appreciate what you had to say. Man, I needed that. I needed that so bad. And she did that for generations of Harding Bison football players. And we loved her so much for that.
The first time I was around Mrs. Prock was Ronnie's senior year when she hosted a players. Did I already say that?
Yeah.
Sorry. You can't talk about Gigi without thinking of the annual homecoming alumni football players and cheerleaders reunion in her backyard when she would make tons of Cabbage Patch stew and lemonade tea. She would have to duplicate the soup recipe 12 times to have enough. When my kids got married, I made them a friends and family cookbook, and her picture and those recipes were included. And now she's inspired Kelly Blickenstaff to carry on that tradition. Over the years, she gave me several cookbooks, all signed and inscribed, and a few cooking tools, which I still use. As you know, Gigi was the ultimate glamour girl, but she could look stylish in jeans and a t-shirt. We worked together in the dean's office where she worked as a chapel secretary. One day when I was new to the dean's job, I walked in after chapel and passed her, and she called me over. I was wearing a black and white plaid dress, skin-toned hose, and black heels. She said to me, Peggy, you need to wear black hose with that dress. So from then on, that's just what I did. If Gigi approved your outfit, then you were good to go.
Can't talk about Miss Prock without talking about Coach. And they were such an awesome team. He was so proud of her and his family. You old guys will remember this. You know, this is before social media, before text message, before any of that. Coach Prock put out a newsletter every summer 3 times. And he would tell, you know, when school got out in May, we scattered for the most part. We were all over the country, back at home, working, earning money to come back to school. And so he would tell what everybody was doing in that newsletter. We'd all have to write in and say, hey, Coach, this is what we're doing. And part of that was an accountability deal, so he would know that we were, you know, we'd have to tell him that we were working out. Some of the guys were liars, I'll be honest with you. But that was part of that newsletter deal. Well, we all knew about Miss Prock's participation in the chicken cooking contest because she had done it several times and never won. But in 1976, Coach Prock sent the newsletter out, and the first page said, Charlene won the chicken cooking contest. Heritage Chicken USA. Now, for us, that was really special because we went on in 1976 to win the conference championship and go play in a bowl game in Pasadena, Texas. And we always said it started with Miss Prock winning the chicken cooking contest.
One of my sweet memories of working with her was when she helped us with the Christian Deans Conference when it was Harding's turn to host. This was the student services deans from all the fellow Christian universities, and we wanted it to be special. She set up tables in her backyard with black tablecloths, Harding plates, wildflowers on the tables, a dulcimer group playing on the cabin porch, and of course, her delicious food. It was a perfect fall evening, and we all walked down Harding Drive together to the event. She also helped me host the Women's Dorm Managers Dinner every year in the spring for 14 years. She would clean out her cabin for us to use and make whatever food I wanted her to. Her bread pudding with caramel sauce and whipped cream was one of my favorites, but she made that event extra special every time.
Coach Prock and Miss Prock, and you have to remember this, when I came to Harding in 1973, they were in their early 40s, and they were a very handsome couple. Coach Prock was a good-looking man, square jaw. You know, he looked good in clothes, and so did she. And years later, I mean, this was probably 5 years ago, I was talking to Gigi and I said, you know, I always admired Coach Prock and the way he dressed. It inspired me when I was coaching to want to look my best. You know, he could rock a polo and slacks and he just had a trim waist and he was just a sharp figure. And she looked at me like, really? I said, yes, ma'am, he sure did. Did you pick his clothes out? She said, no, but I don't know if she was telling me the truth or not. She probably helped him. You know, if she tells somebody what color hose to wear, I would think that he probably coached Coach Prock.
She was my hero for her devotion to Coach Prock after he got sick. She never wavered in her genuine and sincere love for him, even though he couldn't return her affection. And she was determined to keep him at home with her, regardless of what had to be done. Later in life, she had her own health problems, but she never wanted to miss a swirl, as my friend Madonna says. She went to many campus dinners and lectures with us, walked on the field with us at Ronnie's last game, and sat with our family at the dedication of the Huckabee Fieldhouse. I miss her already.
You know, there's a word, or actually an acronym, that's pretty popular in modern culture, FOMO, fear of missing out. The two people that I've known in my life with the worst case of FOMO were Dr. Gaines and Charlene Prock. They did not want to miss anything. In fact, I said this about Dr. Gaines, and I'll say it about Charlene. One of the reasons they hung around so long is, you know, there was something else to do. There was something they wanted to see. But we admired her so much for her willingness to get up and go. I can remember her being with Peggy and I. We'd gone to an ASI event, and we were going down that long stretch between the Heritage Building all the way down to the McIntyre, and this was when she was pretty stooped over. But she'd just stoop over with that walker and she'd go as fast as she could go. And she would always mumble something like, I know people think I'm crazy or I look terrible or whatever. And we were like, that's not right. No, we admire you. We admire your persistence. We admire your willingness to go and do even when your body is rebelling against you. And she was a great role model of persistence.
In closing, I want to say thank you, Charlene, for your big heart, your gift of hospitality, your love of fun and laughter, and for being my friend.
My final take, it goes on with what Peggy said a while ago, and that's her devotion to Coach after he got sick. If there ever has been anyone who modeled in sickness and in health, was Charlene Prock. I had several conversations with her about her taking care of Coach and, you know, what it was doing to her body. And I said, Gigi, how long can you keep this up? And she said, as long as it takes. And I said, well, are you gonna survive this? And she said, Ronnie, that's exactly what he would have done for me. And she was telling the truth. She was funny. She was talented. She was loyal. She was opinionated. She was transparent. And she was so much fun to be around. We loved her and are so thankful for her place in our lives.
All right, not to be outdone, Coach, I have written a poem in Gigi's honor, and I timed it. It's 5 minutes, so everybody's good. All right, here we go. It starts in Fort Worth, Texas, back in 1931. Or was it 1930? No one knows, so she just had to pick one. Didn't know her birthday either, so she chose the 1st of June, but it could have been spring or Christmas or born under a harvest moon. She was given away, as far as we know, as a young baby girl. What a way for a tender child to start out in this big, wide world. At least after that, her childhood was stable, even if there wasn't enough food on the table. Sure, at Christmas, they went out and cut down a tree, but underneath, no gifts, her holidays present-free. A long, skinny girl. She was tallest in her class. Barely ever enough to eat, but boy, did she grow fast. Sweet girl, pleasant face, not always out of trouble. As a preteen, her famous personality began to bubble. A basketball player, all legs, elbows, long femurs. A small-town Oklahoma girl, so naturally a dreamer. In those days, her dreams didn't really extend much further than finding the right guy and going to get a burger. With her girlfriends, walking down the mean streets of Hollis, scouting out the boys. Is he cute? Hey, call us. And find him she did on Main Street one night. Truth be told, it was another guy she had set in her sights. But she ended up on a double date with young Clifford John, and just like that, they were a thing from that very day on. She a baby at 17, and him older by only a year. We don't really make them like that anymore, I fear. A shotgun wedding and a harvest honeymoon. Leaving their homes and becoming one couldn't come too soon. A love affair of over 60 years. That was just the start. A marriage so right and so true, a story to break your heart. A war bride, but soon came Martina and Mona and Cam. When Clifford returned from Korea, then they could really be a fam. After years in Oklahoma, to Arkansas they turned their nose and settled down in Searcy, and this is where the legend grows. At Harding University, the start of a brand new life. Coach John Prock and Charlene, the perfect coach's wife. Of all of Coach's escapades in this poem I have forsook, you can read all about it in Ken Bissell's amazing book. What made Coach possible, though, was all of Charlene's support. She was his secret weapon, his superpower, and his first resort. The house they turned into a home at 27 Harding Drive became a home away from home for more than that family of five, as Gigi welcomed all the football boys into their family's arms. Lonely boys who'd never been away from moms or homes or farms. Hundreds of boys came through her living room and backyard and kitchen. Raise your hand if you were one of those. There were far too many to mention. But it wasn't just the football team that got loved on and cared for and fed. She welcomed anyone to their place, brought there as the Spirit led. Now, you would be remiss to picture Charlene as just a wallflower, making little finger sandwiches and hosting wedding showers. This girl was a pistol, fiercely loyal with a disarmingly witty tongue. But don't talk to her much when Papa was coaching. At games, she was pretty high-strung. A familiar sight at Harding she was every single morning, taking attendance at chapel, handing out tardies, handing out warnings. She also turned her talents to making food and being a caterer. Leaning over that kitchen counter did nothing to help straighten her. For dozens of years, she cooked for events too many to mention, except the highlight perhaps being asked to cater for Governor Bill Clinton. Her skill made her the poultry cooking queen of 1976. Cooking, baking, frying, making, there wasn't a dish she couldn't fix. In fact, right after this service, you're invited to sample her treats. All favorites from Gigi's recipes, every one of them good eats. A proud grandmother of many, her heart's love for them wild. My personal favorite, Dacia, the very first grandchild. Boating at Heber, backyard weddings, and joyful family Christmas. Making memories and spreading the love. That was Gigi's business. For producing coaches, they should put her straight into the Hall of Fame, as the men in her family have won well over 500 games. Remember, I told you she was orphaned as just a little lady? Turns out she had a sister. Didn't find out till she was almost 80. Her final hurrah was her 90th birthday, which gave us all a chance to celebrate Gigi in all her glory and her trademark black leather pants. Yet here we are once again to raise a Charlene hallelujah. We'll see you again, but until then, as she would say, talk to you. So why are we here? What does it mean? And how can we make it make sense? Let me explain it using the parable of the widow who gave her 2 cents. Change the widow to an orphan and the old lady to a girl who didn't have enough to eat, yet seemed to feed the whole world. A child without a family, not much of a home to speak of, became mother to hundreds. So I offer this critique of your life and mine, to take stock of just what we've been given and how we can take it and use it and offer it back up to heaven. That's what Gigi did, and I challenge us to do the same. But like Gigi, not for our own fortune or for our own fame. What have you been given that you need to offer to those around you? For it's in your giving that God then gives the blessings that surround you. You don't have less than this one did, are dearly loved and parted. So open your hands and open your heart. Do Gigi proud and get started. Let's pray together. If you love somebody close, touch them up. Heavenly Father, you knew when you made us that we would need people to look at. We would need models. We would need to set our eyes on something and someone who could show us how to do it. You, of course, have given everything you had in your Son to give him to this earth to show us how to do it. And yet we still falter. So you've seen fit to then offer up others like Charlene, like Gigi, to continue to show us and give us the example of how we need to live. Will you help us remember her, not for her benefit or her fame, but because of what she stood for and what she exhibited and how she lived, will help us do the same and end up where it is that we want to go. Help us be selfless. Help us be loyal. Help us to take whatever spiritual gift we have been given, and everyone in this room's got 1 or 2 or 3 or more. Gigi had the gift of hospitality. She maximized it. What do I have? What do we have here? God, help us do the work of figuring that out and then giving it out to everyone that we meet as an offering to those people, as a use of our talents, but mostly as a way of giving back to you for giving it to us in the first place. We honor now the life of a lady who is simply gone from this earth, but is more fully alive now than any of us are here today. We look forward to the day of rejoining with her and the other ones that people in this room have lost who are waiting for us. We eagerly look forward to that day where all of our tears are wiped away. There's no more sadness, and all the good stuff is what's left. In Jesus' name we pray, and everybody said, amen. I want to invite her son Cam up to finish with some remarks, but lest we forget, come on up, Cam. Lest we forget, we're trying to tell you there's a full-blown Gigi feast right down the hall in the annex, so don't miss. I'm sure they made enough for the boys too, so y'all come on and enjoy it with us.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Cam, John and Charlene Prock's son. And a few years ago, I was talking to Mom on the phone, and she goes, Cam, Dr. City said that Marilyn said that I'm a man's woman. I said, well, okay, Mom. She goes, am I a man's woman? I went, well, all I know is, Mom, that every time I come over here, or every time I call you, there's a 30-year-old man, a 40-year-old man, a 50-year-old man, a 60, a 70-year-old man with his elbows on his knees, leaned in, talking to you. Yes, Mom, you're a man's woman. And she would love to be sitting right in the middle of these guys. She really didn't care about the old people, okay? She would, I think Coach Huckabee asked you to come talk to the boys one time. It seems like somebody did. And she goes, Cam, those boys were so good looking. They were so strong. And she'd have been flirting with y'all. I'm telling you. It's who she was. She loved that. She liked two kinds of guys, football players and cowboys. And so that's what she was attracted to. I mean, she loved football players, and she loved that. She was something, and there was something about men that were attracted to her, and she was attracted to them. The other thing I think about is how many guys sat and told their stories to her. And I know their backgrounds were probably similar in some ways to my mom. She could relate to it. And they would tell her stories, and I know they died right there with her. They were just taken in. She was somebody that was non-judgmental, very opinionated, but non-judgmental. So people could sit there and tell their story and walk out and feel good. It was something to watch. From our family, Martina, Mona, and I, and everybody, we really want to thank people like the West Side community. You know, when you've lived for 92 years, you had a lot of different stages in her life. And so there's a lot of friends from a lot of different levels that we've got to thank. And we really want to thank the West Side community, the whole Harding community. She told me so many times, you know, Cam, we were just going to be here a year or two. And it's been 60-something years, and it's been great. The Harding Drive community that has supported her throughout the years. The Lytle Center that was so important to her for about 6 or 7 years. She got into going to dances and going out there. She loved listening to music, and they treated her so well. The Meals on Wheels people were incredible. And the friends and some of you older folks that have kept coming through the years, that every time you came to town, you went and saw her. It made her so happy. One day, again, on the phone, well, she had been exposed, I think, to the flu. And this has been the last year, and she was weighing about 100 pounds. And it didn't take much at this point to get her sick. So she'd been exposed to the flu, and I think she got a Z-Pack or something that was going to get her through. So I Googled it, and what's the first side effect? Could have hallucinations if you're fairly old. So I'm going, oh, this is going to be bad. So after a day or two, I called her, and she goes, there's a bird in the house. I went, well, okay. Are you sure, Mom? Are you sure? Yes. Every once in a while, it flies by. Well, not hardly anybody's been in and out of the house. I don't know. So I told Robin, I think she could be hallucinating, that there's a bird in the house. So I called back a little bit later, And she answers the phone. She's kind of screeching if you've ever been around her, she was a screecher. And so she screeched and goes, "It's a bird," and blah, blah, blah. And then I hear a man's voice in the background, and he goes, "I think we got it," and opens the door and the bird goes out. And so I was really relieved that it was a real bird in there. But it was Harding Security. She had called Harding Security to come to her house to get a bird out. And she did that all the time. And so I'm thanking Harding Security. That was not their job. But if she ever didn't know what to do, she'd call Harding Security. They would come over, and thank you for Harding Security. A few people, Marge Ryan, they became friends in the last 2 or 3 years, and Marge took her to eat most Friday nights at KJ's or something. That was really fun to watch. Ken Bissell, thank you for everything with this funeral. He's done so much, and what gifts he's got. Thanks, Ken. Really appreciate it. Steve Lake, who's been such a friend to her, and y'all saw what he did. It's so good. The Huckabees, thank y'all. Y'all did a great job. We really appreciate it. Mona, who put together this funeral, she did all this, all that neat stuff you're about to see. That's down Mona's alley. That's who she is. It's just excellent. Thank you, Mona. And also like to thank Barb Harlow. And yeah. Yeah, the last year, Barb took care of her, and we appreciate it. I've wondered if I have any gifts, if I have any power, if I have any superpower, and I do. My mom loved me. Well, that's kind of funny. You're the only girl, but all the rest of them were boys. Well,
Standing in front of everybody.
Well, what about that last day at Hess at school when you were
That what?
Well, that last day at Hess when you were moving, you went back up to school or something to say
They
good.
picked me up at school.
Okay.
Mom and Daddy did. And as we were driving off, I could see it today. They were all standing in the window waving at me.
Well, were people sad or just kind of just saying goodbye? That's good.
Just saying goodbye to me.
Good.
Just my classmates.
Yeah. So you waved back and it was just drove off.
I was waving bye. They were waving.
Was that a sad thing?
Huh?
Was it a sad deal or kind of just the way it is?
It doesn't seem like it.
Yeah.
I don't remember it being.
Yeah. It was. Yep.
We have live music and full-on lunch right down the hallway, so everyone please come and join us. And is the family gonna lead us out? Okay. Okay, perfect. All right. Thank y'all so much for being here.